Hi, I'm Heather Marie Montilla, and you are watching PBS Books. Thank you for joining our conversation with Tana French. In partnership with GBH, PBS Books is proud to partner with the Library of Congress in sharing the National Book Festival with audiences across the country as we promote their festival and our PBS broadcast. Tonight's conversation is an important part of this series. We always like to start by welcoming our library network partners, as well as numerous PBS stations across the country who share this content with you. But most importantly, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us this evening. Today's conversation highlights best-selling New York Times author Tana French and her recently released book, The Searcher. Tana will be featured in the National Book Festival Open a Book, Open the World, as well as the 1-hour PBS special. Let's take a moment and watch the trailer.
Hi, everybody. I'm LeVar Burton, and this is Open a Book, Open the World, the Library of Congress National Book Festival.
When I try and create a work of fiction, one of my big aims is to create an entire world.
And I think that kind of fictional world and how we see characters express their thoughts and feelings, that for me is opening up the world.
I believe that narrative nonfiction is the closest that many of us will ever get to being another person.
And that sense of empathy is good for anybody, but it's also particularly important, I think, for writers, because that's one of our most important tools is the capacity for empathy.
I think there's many places that I've met for the very first time through a book.
For me, books were a way of learning about the world and experiencing things I had never experienced before.
Books have always just shown me just how big and how small the world is.
A good book can take you on a journey. And after the last year, we are all ready to plot a new course, and books can be an amazing compass.
An addiction to reading has been a key secret of my success.
It was literature that opened up so many pathways, so many possibilities for me.
I read books so I could discover new worlds in those books.
I have books. I don't even think of like this room. I don't think of having books in, but I have like 50, 60 books in this room.
It's enlarging your horizon. Books are everything.
It gives me more of a complex understanding of humanity, which I think is the power of stories, that we are able to see ourselves in all manner of different character.
And that, I think, is what I enjoy from a great book.
Join me as some of our nation's leading literary voices bring us a sense of renewal, discuss their newest work, and open up a whole new world of possibilities.
The PBS Library of Congress Open a Book, Open the World premiered last Sunday and on many stations around the country. But it continues to be able to be streamed at pbs.org and can also be seen on GBH this Sunday, the 19th at 1 p.m. The Library of Congress National Book Festival launches, as you will know more about, on September 17th. It runs through the 26th. For more information, go to loc.gov/bookfest. So now it is my great pleasure to welcome the person who will be guiding our conversation today, Brian O'Donovan from GBH's Celtic Sojourn.
Great to be with you, Heather. That's wonderful. What an exciting event you've got coming up here over the next while.
Well, it is so exciting. What's so great is that it's unfortunate that the book festival is virtual on some level, or it's hybrid. But what's amazing is that people across the country can take advantage of all of these amazing conversations, and that we're able to partner with PBS stations like GBH in talking to amazing authors like Tana.
Absolutely. So looking forward to this. And just a reminder to everybody that there are multiple platforms out there, including YouTube. You can search it under PBS Books on YouTube and on Facebook, from where we will be taking some questions as well tonight. So thanks again, Heather, for all your work at PBS. We at GBH are delighted, of course, to be partnered with PBS on so many projects like this. And I'm so happy to be hosting tonight's event, which is a collaboration, as you heard, between PBS Books and GBH here in Boston for the promotion of the Library of Congress National Book Festival. Now, before we get started, I'm going to go into some of the technical details, and listen in closely here because it will enhance your experience. Before we get started, you won't see yourself on video. We'll just be seeing ourselves on video, me and Tana, and you will not be able to speak during the author interview, but we do want to hear from you. That's very important. You can ask questions by opening the Q&A tab, which is at the bottom of your screen in Zoom, and typing in your question. Put in your questions in at any point during the interview. You'll hear me chatting, and I'll do my best to address them as they make sense in the course of the conversation. But you do not need to wait for the second half of the event, for example, to put in your questions. Just feel free to get started now. I know from the number of people that have registered for this event that we're going to have far more questions than we can possibly answer. And I myself could dominate it with the questions for Tana in actual fact, but I'll try to resist that. So you can see the questions that you want to hear the answer to, read those questions and vote for it. This is important because somebody else will probably ask the same question or an approximation of it, the same question that you wanted to ask. By clicking the thumbs up sign, the more votes it gets, it moves up to the top of the list. And we will do our best to ask the most popular questions. But again, managing expectations, it's a short period of time. With somebody as popular as Tana, we will not get to all of them. Now, Zoom has recently rolled out an automated captioning feature, which is important and really cool. Excited now to be able to offer this so that everybody can enjoy our events. To turn on the closed captioning feature, here's what you do. Click the live transcript button, again at the bottom of the screen. 2 transcription display options will pop up, and we recommend that you select subtitle to enable captioning at the bottom of your screen. You can also select full transcript, and a sidebar window will open up where you can see what each speaker is saying. Please bear in mind that closed captioning might be slightly delayed. And now it's my great pleasure and honor, in fact, to welcome on screen our president and CEO, somebody who has advocated for programs like this at the PBS level, and of course here in New England on GBH. John Abbott, great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening and welcome. I'm John Abbott, President and CEO of GBH. We're extremely proud to partner once again this year with PBS Books and the Library of Congress for one of 10 exciting author conversations. These events celebrate the upcoming 2021 Library of Congress National Book Festival, Open a Book, Open the World, to be held this year, September 17th through the 26th. As we all know, there's nothing like getting immersed in a great book. And I'm particularly excited about tonight's featured author, Tana French, a brilliant crime novelist who will be joining us from Dublin to talk about her latest book, The Searcher. I couldn't put down her first thriller, In the Woods, so I look forward to hearing more about her writing process. Literature serves as a gateway to learning about the past. It fuels our imagination and expands our knowledge and understanding of humanity and the world. Ensuring that everyone has access to great literature is core to public media's mission. And I hope you can read with us each month by joining GBH's free virtual Beyond the Page book club. Details on how to join us are in the chat. But in the meantime, enjoy this evening's event. And back to you, Brian.
Tana French. I see that I am now seeing that it is great to have had John Abbott with us here tonight. He is very, very excited about this program as well. Now, if you're just joining us, welcome. We are about to start our conversation with best-selling author Tana French. And as a reminder, if you want to ask Tana questions, you can use the Q&A tab that is located in the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will do our best to answer everybody's questions. And again, we're on PBS Books at Facebook and also on YouTube. We'll be taking some questions from there as well. But now, the moment you've all been waiting for, on screen, Tana French from her home in Dublin. She's the author of 7 previous books. We're going to be talking about her latest, The Searcher, tonight. But these books, including In the Woods, I tend to say, Tana, apologies, Into the Woods, but it's In the Woods, The Likeness, and The Witch Elm. And her novels have sold over 3 million copies, won numerous awards, including the Edgar Anthony McCavity and Barry Awards, the Los Angeles Times Award for Best Mystery Thriller, and the Irish Book Award for Crime Fiction. And she lives in Dublin with her family. Tana French, welcome to this very special event with worldwide audience tonight.
Hi, Brian. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really honored to be here.
What part of Dublin do you live in?
I'm on the south side these days.
Oh, great. Is it? My sister lives in Dalkey. I know that area fairly well. It's a beautiful part of the city, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's gorgeous. Lovely place to be because you're so near the water, aren't you? If you're in Dublin. It's the beach on your doorstep.
It really is an amazing. Anybody, I often advise people who are touristing in Dublin to go to, obviously, the great places there, the ones that are in the tourist brochures, but just simply to take the Dart out to Bray is really extraordinary, and a walk up Killiney Hill. Some of you will know what I'm talking about there. It's really just spectacular.
Oh yeah, and you can wave to Bono if you're going to Dalkey. You can wave at his house as you go past.
You can, and even tip the hat to Enya as well, I think, along the way. A lot of the celebs live out there. Now, you were born, though, right here in New England way back, right? There's a Vermont connection.
Yeah, I was born in Vermont. I don't remember it because we left when I was 2, but I've moved all over the world. But yeah, I still love maple syrup, so I suppose it's stuck, the wrong thing.
You have to take that with you. It's in your genes when you're born in Burlington, Vermont. And then some exciting places in your past lives as well, living in Rome and Malawi. So you must have had parents that moved around for their professional lives. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was my dad. He's retired now, but he was a development economist. So he was working, we were in Malawi because he was working with developing countries on kind of renewable resources or renewable, like planting trees without soil erosion, that kind of thing. It was a great way to grow up, though, I have to say. And it was probably fairly useful for a writer because if you're always moving around, you have to be quite sensitive to cultural signals and cultural differences, because otherwise you're always going to be the weirdo in the room. You have to be able to adapt fairly quickly. So being aware of these sort of little cultural nuances and differences comes in pretty useful when you want to write about somewhere decades later.
No, absolutely. So you've got New England, you've got Rome, you've got Malawi, which is pretty exotic. And then you arrive in Ireland in Trinity College. Now, was this a linear process or was it just something out of the blue? How come you chose Ireland and Trinity?
Well, we've been coming here for summers since I was a kid, basically. And I knew people here and I liked people here as well. I liked the chat, I liked the banter, I liked the way people communicated, I liked the sense of humor. And the thing about being an international grad, I think the official term is third culture kid, but one of these kids who grow up in international schools all over the place, is that when you finish school, there are some kids who know where they live, they know where they're from, they know where they're going. The Americans go back to America, and the Italians in my school stayed in Italy. But then there's the rest of us who aren't really particularly from anywhere. And the world is our oyster. We can really choose anywhere we want. And Ireland, where I had some friends and knew I liked the culture and the place, made more sense than anywhere else. It was, it was the only place that made any sense. There wasn't anywhere else that I considered to be home. So why not? And here I am, and I just stayed.
And there you are, exactly, for like 31 years now or something. Is that correct? Around that, 1990? Yeah. I mean, that's a long time.
Yeah, God, it only sank in there when you said it. But yeah, 31 years now.
No, seriously, I can imagine that's the case. Now, you arrived in Ireland at Trinity College in an interesting time. The Celtic Tiger, as it was called, that economic boom and which wrought such changes in Ireland, was kind of shifting into third gear, if you will, around the time that you attended Trinity. Describe that atmosphere arriving in Dublin as a young student. What did you experience and how did it impact you?
Well, I don't think the Celtic Tiger had really kicked in any way that we would have noticed. It still felt a little bit late 80s because it was 1990, you know what I mean? We were still hanging around in docks and great big paisley shirts and messed up jeans.
Well, actually, personally, if I can say, that was my favorite time in Ireland because it was full of possibility with the eventual excesses of the Celtic Tiger, which you describe in some of your writings as well.
No, I totally agree. And during that summer, the summer I moved there, there was this wonderful moment in the Football World Cup, which every Irish person remembers, and which a lot of people kind of trace culturally the whole Celtic Tiger, the whole economic and cultural and a confidence boom that Ireland had in the 90s to this moment when, against all the odds, we were not supposed to get anywhere in this World Cup. And Packie Bonner saved a penalty and sent us through to the quarterfinals. And there was this feeling of enormous potential, enormous possibility that was captured. You know, Roddy Doyle captures it so well in The Van, and just this sense that all of a sudden, from being a country that was ground down by poverty and various forms of oppression, Ireland was a country that could get places, do things, that had huge potential. And all of that explosion felt later on, in retrospect, like it started from that moment.
And it certainly was. And those of you watching that know what Tana's referring to will know it very, very intimately. Those who have just a vague idea, the importance of that event and the importance of that injection of confidence in it probably led to a lot of the development of the Celtic Tiger, but it certainly led to, as I said, a sense of confidence in the country, but also excesses that some of which are touched on in your writing, Tana. So from that period of time, you were a keen observer of Irish life, of small town life, and the quirks that are at once charming in Ireland, but also can be somewhat looming, as is the case in your book, The Searcher, which we will talk about a little more extensively. But back to your early days, you thought you were, and in fact you still do, a lot of acting. So acting was in your initial purview, right? And your ambitions as an artist?
Yeah, that was the plan. I trained at Trinity as an actor and acted for years. And then, you know, the gigs didn't line up neatly because they kind of never do unless you're Judi Dench. And the other thing I've always loved is archaeology. Since I was a kid, that was actually the original career plan.
Archaeology?
Yeah, I was going to be an archaeologist when I was 6. I was going to discover Troy, and then I found out someone who had already done that. So, you know, great. First big career disappointment of my life, but it turned out all right in the end.
I think it did.
So I reckoned I had a few weeks off between gigs, and I went, I'd love to work on another archaeological dig. I'd done it before, and I got myself a few weeks' work on a dig. And there was a wood not far from the dig. And I was, you know, looking at it one day and got, oh God, that would be a great place for kids to play. But the thing I think that makes a mystery writer is you're always looking for the potential mystery in everything. And instead of stopping at that, like a normal person would, I went, so what if 3 kids ran in there one day to play and only one came out and he had no memory of what had happened to the others? And what if he became a detective someday and a murder investigation drew him back to that wood and to whatever's hidden inside his mind? And that turned into my first book, In the Woods. It kind of wasn't the plan, and I wasn't sure I could write a book, but I thought I could probably write one scene and then another scene, and then, oh my God, I've got a chapter. And then suddenly I realized I was serious enough about this that I was actually turning down acting work. And if you know any actors, they don't turn down work. They really, really don't. And I was turning down acting work in order to finish this book. And that's kind of the moment when I realized that I was very serious about this writing thing.
How interesting, because archaeology is a question of piecing together clues very painstakingly, right?
Yeah, it's very much the same process, both as the process described as of the detective solving the mystery, but also of the actor. They all have a lot of parallels where you start with something, you start with kind of a finished product, and you have to peel back the layers and figure out what could have brought things to this point. So yeah, they fit together quite well, unexpectedly.
So the other thing that I've really enjoyed with you is you've captured the dialogue, and how much is that related to acting as well? You can almost imagine the dialogue that you write is almost like a script. You can imagine it actually being spoken. That's what I imagine in my mind, it actually being spoken in that Irish idiom that is quirky. Let's be realistic about it. It's a combination of the translation of the Irish language into English idiom, and you capture that very well.
Oh, thank you very much. That means a lot to me. It's useful being an actor, because if I write a line of dialogue and I look at it and I go, I could not get up on a stage and say that, then it probably needs to change. But if it feels like it'd be easy to say as an actor, it'd roll off the tongue, then you've probably hit the right note. And it also helps that as an actor, you listen, you pay attention to other people, because other people are what you're interested in, they're what matter. And so you're listening to rhythms, you're listening to different dialects, to the ways people express themselves obliquely, the layers that filter in, the subtexts, and that's useful for a writer.
In the Woods was the first in the series. Could you have imagined when you wrote it or when you were writing it that it would become a series? Was it designed as such, or was it just designed as a one-off?
No, it was designed as a one-off. I had no plans of writing a series, but then I kind of finished it off, I sent it off, and I started thinking, daydreaming, what if by some huge piece of luck this sells and then they want me to write another one? What would I do? And the classic thing to do with detective stories is to follow the same narrator through various books, the same main character. And I love reading those series, but I wasn't that interested in writing them, because what I'm interested in is the great turning points in a character's life, the moments where you know that whatever this character decides will define the rest of his or her life in one way or another to some extent. And there's a limit to how many of those turning points anyone has in their life. So I reckoned I could either do the more classic thing of following the narrator through more minor ups and downs, like say, P.D. James does with her Dalgleish novels, where, you follow him through the normal vicissitudes of life. Or I could keep dropping my poor narrator into these huge life-changing decisions every couple of years. Like, he's going to be in a straitjacket by book 3, Or I could switch narrator. And it occurred to me, I had the beginnings of an idea for the likeness. And it occurred to me that a lot of the themes around this idea of a detective arriving at a crime scene to find that the victim looks exactly like her, a lot of kind of the underlying currents of identity and past and future would be a very good match to Cassie Maddox, who is sort of the second lead in The Woods.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I liked the idea of switching perspective, giving a secondary character the front row seats the next time, because for me, one of the crucial things about any of the arts, about books, is that they draw you into someone else's perspective. They give you the insight that everybody else out there has a perspective that is as real and as full and as vivid and as important as your own. So I like the idea of switching narrator, because I reckoned it would tie in with that as well, where if one character has their own perspective on somebody else or a situation in one book, and then you get to see how that looks from the other person's perspective, it brings to light the fact that there are as many perspectives as there are people, and they interconnect and they may contradict each other, and no one of them is the whole picture. Each one of them has its validity and deserves a voice.
So on the Dublin Murder Squad, we're talking about 6 books, right? So far, is that what it is? And then a break. But let's stay with that just for a moment, because I know a lot of our audience is fascinated with the Dublin Murder Squad and in every aspect of it. But it sounds like what you're saying is that in some ways you're almost a conduit for these characters, that they kind of exist on their own. They're born into their own personalities, and they say, Tana, write me in to this next novel. It's got that level of animation to it. At what point do you know that you're going to keep going at, up to 6 novels? And I'll have a follow-up question to that as well. But did you, again, was each one of them a standalone? You can read the Dublin Murder Squad books, you can read each one as a standalone. You don't have to read them even in sequence.
Yeah, I kind of thought of each of them more or less as a standalone, but a chain-linked standalone, I suppose, because I come at writing as an actor, and I've always been a character actor. I'm not one of these actors who like playing facets of their own personality. I like playing other people as far from me as possible, because for me, again, that's the point of it. So my job, if I'm going to do that, is to get out of the way as much as possible and give the character as much of the stage, as much of the book, as much of the space as is possible. The more I'm out of the way, the more I'm doing my job. And so I aim to write that way as well, to let the character have all the space. I am, not particularly interesting for the purposes of any reader. I'm just someone in Dublin, but the characters are the ones who have a story to tell and who are interesting and who need that space. So yeah, I'm coming at it like that, as getting out of the way.
So we've got a lot of people voting for this next question, and it's obviously top of mind of people who have read all of those books around the Dublin Murder Squad. Are there others coming? Will you be writing any additional Dublin Murder Squad books?
I don't know. I I'm not good at planning particularly far ahead. I don't want to lead it. I think there's definitely more to be said about the Dublin Murder Squad. I don't have any ideas for it right at the moment, but I definitely wouldn't rule out coming back to it. I moved away from it kind of because I'd written 6 books then from the perspective of the detective, now a different detective every time, but still the detective. And I kept thinking that within a murder investigation, there are so many different perspectives. There's a detective, there's a victim, there are witnesses, there are suspects, there's a perpetrator. And each of those has a totally different experience of the investigation from the detective. Like for the detective, right? All the police procedural stuff, all the murder investigation stuff, that's a source of power and control and order. It's the way you control it and you use it to put back order on chaos. But for everybody else involved in the investigation, it's something very different. The investigation is something that just comes barreling into your life, overturns it. You have no control. You don't know what it's doing, where it's going, why you've been swept up in this thing. And I thought those viewpoints deserved some perspective too. I was a little uncomfortable with only ever writing from the viewpoint of the detective, the force of authority, the definer almost of what an investigation should be and where it should go. And that's where the Witch Elm in some ways came out of, where Toby, the narrator in Witch Elm, he is at various points in the book, he is victim, witness, suspect, perpetrator, and he tries to be detective for a little bit, but it really, really doesn't go his way. And I thought these things needed a voice as well, and there was no reason I should just stick to that one perspective. I wanted to try out the other ones. And in The Searcher, there's an ex-detective who does not want to be a detective and is deeply uncomfortable with the concept of what a detective is and is trying to move away from it and is sucked back into some elements of it and has to manage to hold on to the ones he values while not holding on to the ones that he finds morally very dubious.
Well, The Searcher is top of mind in me at the moment because I'm deeply immersed in it with about 2 chapters to go. I'm convinced that somebody's going to spoiler it for me here tonight. But
no spoilers.
Don't spoil it. Please don't spoil it. But so we're going to talk about The Searcher in just a moment, actually, and a lot of our conversation is going to revolve around it. But I've got another couple of questions. Andrea Rosenberg says, and a lot of people voting for this question, I love the Dublin Murders series on TV. Can we look forward to more of your books coming to TV? It seems to be that there was a coming together of perfect timing here, that your books and the proliferation of TV series seem to really complement each other. What's the outlook for more of those coming to the small screen, or even the big screen for that matter?
Yeah, no, I don't think they are going to make a second series of those. I don't actually know. I wasn't involved in the series particularly. I was going to be originally because I thought it was going to be like a straight up adaptation of the books, but it turned out that what they wanted to do was more of a complete reimagination. And I just went, I'm not going to be useful here. I'm going to be that awful author in the background going, excuse me, it's not like that in the book. And nobody wants that. I'm only going to be stressing everyone out. So I took a big step back and went, they know what they're doing with TV. I'm going to be over here doing what I know how to do, which is write books. So I wasn't particularly involved and don't know much about what went into the decisions. But as far as I know, they're not going to take up the second series.
And it doesn't sound like it's top of mind for you as a determination to have them arrive in a screen in any direction. You're a writer. It sounds like what you're saying specifically.
Yeah, exactly. That's something where I don't know my way around and can't really contribute very much.
But if the opportunity presented itself, you wouldn't say no if it was the right opportunity to have them be translated.
To have them brought to the screen. Not if it was the right opportunity. I think, I'll tell you, I loved with the Dublin Murder Squad, I loved the fact that something I came up with was making work for actors. Because I know a load of actors, a load of my friends are still actors and nobody's ever got enough work. So the idea that I had made something that was giving mates of mine work and other people I knew work, that was great. I love that.
Good for you in saying that. What is the best piece of writing advice you received that you still use in your own writing? Is there anybody that reached down and said, Tana, this is what, I've been around this block for a while. And Teresa is asking that question on behalf of 32 of our watchers tonight.
I had an English teacher in school in Rome who was incredibly kind and encouraging and passionate and really made a huge difference in me turning out to be a writer. And she was always telling me I needed to cut some of those adjectives, and she was right. And I still think of her when I cut out one of those extra adjectives. I fired them out of a bazooka. Some of them need to go.
Good advice. Moving on to The Searcher and The Witch Elm as well, moving away from Dublin Murder Squad per se, but into a different realm. The Searcher particularly has impressed me as, I don't know, I've been reading it and just savoring it, but it's a really take your time of character development. It spends a long, long time just really deeply establishing the characters of Cal Hooper and the small community he finds himself in. Was that a very deliberate thing on your part to create that, kind of set the scene, paint every single aspect of it in minutest detail in actual fact?
Well, the setting, I think, in this one matters a lot, because where The Searcher came out of was I'd been reading Westerns, which I'd never read before, and I was recommended Lonesome Dove and read that, and that onto the genre, and I was really enjoying it. A lot of the elements of the Western I really enjoyed, and I started thinking that the settings had actually quite a lot in common with the west of Ireland. You've got that harsh country that demands real physical and mental toughness out of anyone who wants to make a living from it, but you've also got this place that is geographically and culturally so distant from the centers of power that the people feel like the power brokers have no clue about their lives and don't care. And that if they want a cohesive society, they're going to have to both make and enforce their own rules. And that's very much a thing both in the classic Western and in the more rural parts of the west of Ireland. You've got to establish your own rules. And I liked the Western trope of the outsider. You know how he kind of strolls into town and he rolls into the saloon and he's got a secret or two of his own. I thought the outsider, he's a big thing in the Western because you know things are going to change around him. He's going to be a catalyst. Maybe he'll shoot the corrupt sheriff and set things to rights, or maybe he's going to get shot for stirring up trouble in the town, but he's going to change things. He's going to bring hidden things to light. And the outsider also shows up a lot in great Irish fiction and drama. Like if you look at two of the great classic Irish plays, Playboy of the Western World and The Field, both of them revolve around an outsider coming into a small town and everything shifting and changing around them. So I started thinking about transposing the Western to the west of Ireland. But if you're going to do that, especially with a genre that is so deeply rooted in its setting, you have to establish the setting. The world of the book is really, really important to the meeting of the genres and to the book, and everything else has to grow out of that setting. So yeah, it was quite deliberate that the setting and the outsider who comes into it have to be completely developed and real before the other stuff starts creeping in.
Well, I think that context is absolutely wonderful for anybody who's reading The Searcher currently or intends to. And of course, McMurtry kind of really epitomizes that take your time character development as well. Long form, basically, not don't rush the plot and don't rush the landscape even that you're describing. Now, you described though a reality to this, whereas the Western does have a sense of reality to it, but I suppose just back in history, it kind of gives us a little bit of distance. But you're talking about a current situation that has a reality, a real edge to it. The small Irish community, not just small town, but small area, very important in Ireland, the rural area, maybe with a couple of houses, a shop, a pub at the center of it, still is very much alive in all of its glory, in all of its friendliness, in all of its challenges, and indeed in all of its foreboding. This is a real life scenario that you're writing about currently.
Yeah, and it's a really powerful thing, the small town. I've spent a certain amount of time in the West, and one of the biggest things about it, now I live in the city, and if I want to keep to myself and have no effect on my neighbors, it's fairly easy for me to do that. You don't get a dog that barks and you don't play your music too loud, and basically you're gone. You can not have any effect on your neighbors. But in a small town, you don't really have that choice. Your choices make an impact on your neighbors and on the community as a whole, whether you want them to or not. There's a bit actually in The Searcher where Lena is explaining to Cal that a lot of the girls, the young women, would go off once they started being able to get better jobs. They'd go off to the city and get, more interesting jobs, and that left many of the men who had to stay on the farms to work the family farm, left them with no one to marry. So you've got all these old bachelors getting old on their own up on the hills without kids growing up, and that changes their perspective on the world. And so what seems initially like a very personal individual choice to go off to the city and get a job there is actually a choice that has a ripple effect to the whole community. And that is a fact about small communities, small towns in Ireland. You are not disconnected from your neighbours. You don't have that option. And that's a very powerful thing. And it's a reality still today. It's very powerful both for good, but it can also be very dangerous when anything you do tugs at a web of strings that binds you to everyone around you. And Cal, the main character of Searcher, has come to this small townland because he thinks it'll be simpler morally, because he feels that he's somehow lost hold of his moral code, or his sense of himself as a good man, and the right and wrong that he thought were very simple things have turned out to be much more complicated than he thought. And he thinks that if he's in a very small townland, it will be simple again. He'll be able to get hold of that simple right and wrong. And of course, it turns out to be just the opposite, because everyone is so interwoven that anything you do has multiple effects that you didn't plan on and didn't expect.
Interesting question related to that. Chip Hitchcock writes, and has #1 voting for the question currently. He says a number of your earlier books have entirely Irish characters, but the Searcher, interestingly, I've said Searchers as well, going back to the old Western, the classic Western, but the Searcher looks at the clash between an arrival from the US and the somewhat isolated locals he settles amongst. Does the book reflect any of your experience as someone raised in the US moving to Ireland? Particularly, have you gotten any pushback? And I think this is an interesting question, an interesting part of the question. Have you gotten any pushback from local reviewers asking how someone from away can write about people whose ancestry in Ireland goes back centuries? I guess it's writing about, as an outsider yourself, even though you've been there for 31 years and you sound Dublin, and you obviously identify with Dublin and everything else. Is there that type of pushback at all? Chip Hitchcock writes.
I don't particularly read reviews because they're going to distract me, and then I'll start thinking, oh, maybe they're right, I should have done that, and then I'm not thinking about what I'm supposed to be writing. So I don't know about reviewers, but I do know that while I consider myself more probably Irish than anything else, I'm very aware that I'm not Irish in the sense of my husband, he's from the Liberties in Dublin, and his ancestry goes back there probably as far as the Vikings. That's that's how deeply Dublin he is, and I'm fairly sure that anyone here would probably see a big gap and see that I'm not, in fact, Irish in that sense, or from Dublin in that sense. For me personally, as a writer, I think it's an advantage in some ways to be almost an insider, but not. Because there are things that if you are monocultural, if you are properly from a place, you take them for granted. Even little stuff like what constitutes, friendly slagging, friendly teasing versus the edge when it's not quite so friendly. You take that for granted. You don't think about it.
If you even use the term slagging, I need to explain that. This is two Irish people talking to each other here. Yes. So slagging is a very, very particular word that needs, because it actually features a lot in your books, not just in The Searcher. The idea of the slag, which means that it's a friendly insult, it's sort of jocular, but sort of serious, is when somebody gives you a barb, a very jarring barb, and says, here, it was a kidding. Not kidding, you know what I mean? It's that kind of, it's kind of like a half jibe, a half jar, but it's a very, very common way of communicating in Ireland, particularly in social settings, particularly in the pub, for example.
Yeah, it's a way of showing affection most of the time. It's a way of showing affection, but it doesn't necessarily sound like that to an outsider. But the little nuances that distinguish the various forms of slagging someone off, they would be taken for granted by someone who's from here. Mm-hmm. But I noticed them because I had to acclimatize to them. So I kind of am very aware of these nuances, maybe in a way that somebody who's properly from here might not be. And so that makes it easier to write them and to get the borderlines clear. I hope anyway. So sorry.
And yet, Tana, you're able to kind of capture, again, going back to your acting experience or your writing experience or your scripting experience, you're able to capture the nuances as well of that language and how people communicate in those situations, whether the situation is one of tension, as it is often in the Cal Hooper story. This detective arrives ex-detective arrives into a very small community. How do you do that? Is that something that it isn't even, you talk about the west of Ireland being unique, for example. That spiel that you capture in The Searcher is not standard Dublin 4 spiel at all. It's very west of Ireland, it's very Irish rural. How did you acquire that experience?
Listening, and again, I've spent time down the west as well, and it's I have to say, I love the west. It's got a completely different kind of beauty from the east of Ireland, which is where I live, which is much more kind of gentle, lush, rolling countryside, Wicklow. And the west it's wilder, the waves are bigger, the wind is sharper, it's everything is kind of rougher, harsher, more intense kind of beauty. And I love it. I think it's amazing. And I've spent time down there, and you pay attention, which is again a skill that you get as an international brat, because you have to pay attention when you come to a new place, because otherwise you're going to be that weirdo. You have to pay attention to what the conventions are and the dialect and all those little nuances. So you just listen. And I think if you're an actor, if you're a writer, you are almost by necessity someone who thinks people are really interesting and fascinating and mysterious and wonderful. So you're paying attention without even meaning to necessarily.
Which of course they are, all of the above. And you're dealing in a situation as well of what you call the outsider. In parts of Ireland, it's called, and you use this term, it's called the blow-in, which is a very important term in Ireland as well. It means that you're not from there, and therefore you're there at the suffering of the locals. You don't quite have ownership of the milieu, if you will, of your own milieu.
Yeah, you sort of blew in on the last breeze and might blow out again anytime. And you're absolutely right. You don't have ownership. But the interesting thing, the thing I wanted to play with is that any blow-in to any place comes with a preconception, not just of what the place is, but of what their relationship with it will be. And Cal comes to this place with a perception, which I think is any blow-in always comes to any place with the perception that it's simpler than it is, that it's more straightforward than it is, because there's no way that you can perceive all the many layers that underlie any place without years of experience. And I think Cal probably could have spent quite a long time in this small town land without having it brought home to him quite how complex it was, except that he gets dragged into the middle of affairs, which is not the normal experience of a blow-in, especially down the country in Ireland. The blow-in tends to get kept out to a certain extent of local affairs, except there's this local kid for Cal, whose brother has disappeared mysteriously a few months before, and who really wants someone to investigate this, except that nobody will do it. So Trey, the kid, decides that the retired detective who has blown in onto their doorstep is the ideal person to investigate this disappearance, and that Cal is not going to get away without investigating it. So he gets dragged down basically like quicksand straight into the middle of the affairs of this place, and he has to open his eyes to the fact that this place is not as complex, or is much more complex than he thought, much more quickly than he otherwise would have. But as you say, he's not in the position to be in any way the definer of the terms here. He can't in any way define the terms. He can't in any way control the discourse. He is at the mercy of this place and its pre-established rules.
It's a stunning book. It really is. As I said, I've got 2 chapters left. I can't wait to finish it. Please don't spoil it for me, any of you questioners out there, because it's just really, it is truly extraordinary, and I'm really looking forward. And congratulations on that. There are so many questions Tana, around The Searcher, around Back to the Dublin Murders, et cetera, et cetera. But can I ask you, this is a personal question from me. You're obviously very much into American music, Americana music, and you reference it in The Searcher a lot. You reference some wonderful Emmylou Harris, John Prine, Steve Earle is in there, Emmylou Harris. Is that your chosen music? Is that a musical form that you love?
I do love Americana, but I'm a real mix on music. I don't know enough quite about any genre to call myself like an aficionado in any of those, but I listen to a lot of stuff just because it felt right for Cal. You know, the songs starting right back with Steve Earle, with Johnny Cash, and working way up to, you know, people like Nathaniel Rateliff, who's more on the blues side, and working my way right up to the more modern stuff. It just felt like what Cal would be listening to. So I learned a lot more about it over The Searcher, I have to say.
Frank Mackey, I'm back here on the book, is mentor, protagonist, antagonist without ever feeling like a different character, Gabriel Bergmoser writes. Can you speak a little about the process of developing a character who can seamlessly fill so many roles?
Thank you, because that is a huge compliment and I really, really appreciate it, because Frank Mackey just is somebody he shows up in the likeness as this guy who's sort of, a mentor, but a slightly tricksy one. And then he's a protagonist in Faithful Place. And then he shows up later on in The Secret Place as somebody who is not quite on the side of the detectives investigating. I think partly that goes back to, I like characters to be different depending on who is seeing them. I like to acknowledge the fact that we are not to other people who we personally consider ourselves to be. We are not always the same role in other people's lives as we are in our own, or as we would like to be in their lives. That, you know, perspectives are slippery. Everybody has their different perspective, and each of them has a power and a validity, and each of them is shaped by our own fears, our biases, where we're coming from. And I like to work with that. But Frank also, you know, Frank specifically, he's a slippery guy. He's got a few things that he cares about and that he considers to be his absolute standards that he would never betray. And I think he lists them, and they're basically his city, his job, and his kid, and that's it. But for anything else, he is willing to transform and to morph into whatever the situation demands of him in order to gain his objective. And that is fun to write. I have to say that's a lot of fun, because his morality, apart from those three immutable things, his morality is quite flexible. Mm-hmm. And for somebody, most of us spend quite a bit of time trying to make sure that we don't do any damage, and that we do the right thing, and that we don't harm other people, and that we care about other people's feelings. And to write a character who doesn't actually particularly care about right, wrong, other people beyond those three things, it's a lot of fun to just slip the bonds of all your own moral principles on paper and know that nobody will be harmed in the making of this book. You know, it was fun to write. Frank was a lot of fun.
In the Dublin Murders, Tara Derman writes, you have many minor characters. Were there any of those minor characters that you considered for a future protagonist, given the structure of the books and the architecture of the books, but then rejected? Do you go through those? It's an interesting question, actually, that there are characters that people know in those books, and you say, this one could now be a future protagonist, but they're not.
Yeah, there were a few of them, actually, who I would have loved to write about if the right story ever popped out. There's someone who has basically just one scene in The Trespasser, who is he's an undercover detective who's an old acquaintance of the narrator of Antoinette's. Fleas is his nickname, he basically zips in for one scene and then he's gone. But he was fun. He was interesting to write. His way of approaching situations and relationships was very different from any of the other characters I'd written, and I thought he would be fun to write again. And there was also, oddly, the head of the murder squad, the super, O'Kelly, who is very different depending on which book you're reading and which narrator's eyes you're seeing him through. But he seemed like an interesting guy, and one who probably had a story in there somewhere to tell. But so far the stories haven't shown up. I've been taking the little sort of break from the murder squad to hopefully clear my head and come back to it a bit different.
Talk a little bit about it seems to be an amazing period of time for Irish writers generally, especially women writers, it seems to me, have taken their position in Irish writing famously years and years ago in a collection put together by Seamus Dean. The number of women writers that were represented in the Field Day anthology, a huge compendium of Irish writing, was disastrously and embarrassingly low. But now it seems the tables have reversed, and a number of young Irish novelists and poets, writers of all descriptions, playwrights, has just exploded. Can you account for that in some way, or is it just a coincidence like an American Bloomsbury coming together?
I don't know. I've actually thought a lot about this because there really has been, there's just been this massive explosion of Irish women writers, genre, non-genre, across the board. And people taking possession of the literary space, women taking possession of the literary space. And I think some of it is that there's a lot to process for young women in Ireland. There's a lot of cultural baggage to process. And of course, one of the ways we do it is via writing. And for a long time in Ireland, women's voices were completely suppressed on every level, you know, by basically the amount of power the Catholic Church had. Women's voices weren't really wanted or heard. And it was, terrible things were done to Irish women over decades. And I think there's a kind of cultural damage there that's being processed by this new generation, who are, one of the most powerful things they can do is to have a voice when voices were denied to so many of their mothers, their grandmothers, their, you know, their aunts, so many people who were stashed away in Magdalen laundries, who never made it, who weren't allowed to speak their own stories. Just the act of having a voice feels extremely powerful and rebellious, I think, for young Irish women, and extremely groundbreaking almost. So I think there's that gives some of the passion and the freshness and the excitement around the kind of generation that's coming up. It's great stuff that's happening.
And it must be great to be around as well as an artist in your own right, just to be around that group. So talk about in your own life, this is a Library of Congress initiative, it's Library of Congress National Book Festival. The importance of reading and the importance of libraries to that process as a kind of a democratic process, if you will. How important is access to libraries around the world?
It's massive.
How was it in your own life? How important was it?
No, it's huge. Access to books, and libraries, of course, are one of the major sources of books if you don't have a lot of money. That is huge. That's enormous. I can remember, for me personally, when we lived in Malawi, there wasn't a lot of access to books, and it wasn't like now where you can order things off the internet and they will arrive. My mum brought like a stash of books with her and doled them out to us little by little over the months until we would get a chance to go somewhere where there would be a bookshop. But our school had a little library, right? Just a little small room with a bunch of wildly eclectic books jammed in there. I don't even know where they got this stuff, but I would trawl through it and find the most amazing things that brought me into worlds that I had never thought about, never known, never imagined. I can still remember, you know, finding books about England that would give you an image of an English Christmas. This wasn't in my lexicon, in my mental image bank at all. It was just a whole new world. I'm sitting there, you know, in Malawi in the tropics, reading about this, or reading, I was ill when I was 10 and had a couple of weeks at home convalescing. My mum got me Shakespeare to shut me up because she reckoned that would keep me be quiet for a while. Reading Midsummer Night's Dream with the audiobook in my ears, things that I probably wouldn't have stumbled across if this bizarre mixed little library hadn't existed and hadn't given me the chance to dig out strange things, where its limitations almost helped. Because a library that had a wider selection, I would have probably gone more naturally for the kids' books that appealed to me more. But because there were so many limitations, there was almost nothing in there. You had to try out different things. You had to try out, you know, whatever was there. And it was tremendously exciting to go into that library and find something that had never occurred to you before. And it's not just libraries, right? It's librarians. I can think of the librarian of that one, of my school library when I was in Rome as a teenager, of various libraries that I've known since, where my tastes to this day have been shaped by librarians when I was, 8, when I was 12, when I was 15, going, I think you might like this. And there is nothing like that librarian who watches you and knows the books you've taken out and has saved one for you. There's nothing like that.
So it's not just the bricks and mortar, it's not just the books themselves, it's actually the curation, if you will, and the trust that you have in somebody that's able to artistically pass on that message and that encouragement is really, really very, very important. So it's really, tell me what are you reading currently? What name a couple of authors that feature in Tana French's life right now?
What have I been reading currently? I got an early sneak peek at Amor Towles' Lincoln Highway, which everyone should read. It is just a stunner of a book. It's lovely.
I love his writing. It's just absolutely amazing. Yeah.
Well, that's part of it. He writes like a dream. You can't see why this sentence is just so gorgeous. There's no way to pick it apart. It looks effortless, but it's just beautiful. And it's all about journeys and how they don't go where you expect them to, and how you pick up people along the way who aren't who you expected to be with, and they shape your journey as well. It's lovely.
And the name of that book is? It's not
The
out
Lincoln
yet.
Highway. Sorry, The Lincoln Highway.
The Lincoln Highway. Great. Yeah. Oh my God, I'm so looking forward to that. My last question for you is audiobooks are very important, increasingly importantly these days. And how important is the narrator in an audiobook to you? The searcher, I'm listening on audio, for example. I don't know if you've heard it or not, but that guy is gifted.
He's stunning. He really is.
He's marvelous. When I listen to it first, any of you, this might be a little bit inside baseball because I'm listening on audio, but this reader just acts the parts. And when I heard first, I said, oh no, this is much to an American accent. But he's able to capture the Irish nuances of the Western dialect and colloquialisms almost perfectly.
Yeah, no, he's wonderful. I actually, I asked a friend of mine, also an actor who I've worked with a bunch of times before, I was saying, well, we need a narrator for this audiobook, but it's going to have to be somebody special. It's going to have to be somebody who could do a Western, but who could also be in a production of The Field or Playboy of the Western World and connect to both of those and understand both of those worlds. This friend of mine went, I don't know if he's going to be available, but I know who you need. And he was right. He was absolutely right.
And the very last question from two of my grown kids, they want to know if the protagonist, the narrator in the West did it.
In the woods?
Was involved in the crime to begin with.
Man, I would have to be I would have to be very, very drunk before I would give you even
I assume that's exactly the answer I would get, Tana. Well, maybe we'll manage to do that. We'll go for a drink somewhere on the south side of Dublin sometime, and I'll get that answer for them privately. It's been just delightful. The last hour has really been so enjoyable to chat with you.
Thank you so much. It's been a lovely chat, and it's felt like sitting in a pub over a pint. Thank you so much.
That's what it should be.
And thank you to everybody. Just a quick thank you to everyone for coming along, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. A great thank you to PBS, a great thank you to Heather Marie Montilla, a great thanks to Abby Blake here at GBH and all of the other folks involved behind the scenes. A particular thank you to all of you who, unfortunately, we left many of your questions on the Q&A whiteboard here, but continue to read, continue to advocate for libraries if you can, continue to advocate in your local community for access to literature. There is nothing more important at this time, and continue to yourself encourage people to read and engage in literature at all levels. Our thanks to John Abbott for being part of tonight and his support of the PBS initiative. And again, I'm Brian O'Donovan. Great to have you with us. Look forward to joining with you on one of these events coming up. Check out our local offerings here at wgbh.org/events. Goodbye and good luck.